Good day, everyone. Welcome back to one of my weekly live streams. At this point, talking about my latest book, The Unstoppable Sales Prospecting System. And today I want to talk about the writing process. Now, I realize as a sales professional, if that's what you're watching, if that's the role that you're in, if you're a sales leader, you might say, well, Shawn, I'm not interested in a book. Why would you tell me about the writing process? But I'm always interested. More often than not, many of my clients and those who I meet eventually ask me, hey, so how did you come about writing this book? So I thought I would share this with you briefly for what it's worth. The processes that I use in my training programs, and even some of the processes that I mention when I deliver a keynote at an event or a sales kickoff meeting, oftentimes I find have different levels of priority with different groups. And each and every year, some of those processes that I mentioned become more important than others. So prospecting, for example, has always been one of the biggest struggles for most sales professionals. That's been covered by studies galore. And I'm sure if you're in sales, it's something that you've found a little bit challenging. And increasingly, clients were bringing me in to provide insights, tools, tips, scripts, methods, etc., to help their team prospect more effectively. So, of course, hindsight's always 2020. I realized that when I wrote The Unstoppable Sales Machine, it really covered, it was like a soup to nuts, beginning to end process for sales in general. I even talked a little bit about the marketing aspect of selling, but I hadn't really written anything that specifically discussed prospecting. And of course, I'm out there every day working with sales teams globally. So I get the advantage of not only sharing what I know works, but also observing what others are trying, things people are testing that are working really well. So I thought, why not put all of these into a book? And hence, here it is. Now, the process itself that I go through. So that's kind of how the idea comes about. Right now, as an example, I've got two books that I'm working on. Both are in different areas of sales. Both will probably be coming out over the next couple of years. I'm just not sure which will be first. But again, it arises from the same kind of scenario. I hear a lot of salespeople make comments. They're struggling. Some of the coaching I do, they bring up challenges they're facing. And when I have a process for it and the process is working, suddenly I think, well, hold on, should this be a book? Could this be a book? Prospecting today is so difficult, right? It's changing, especially with the advent of AI, that the challenge is, okay, how do we get the attention of, earn the attention of, and get more meetings with our prospects in this day and age? Hence, I captured it all here. But the process itself is pretty straightforward. So I start with the idea, as I've explained to you. Then I say, okay, if I was going to put this book together, what would the chapters look like? What are the components, the main components? Sometimes I'll start with, 4 parts, 3 parts, 5 parts to the book. So I break down the idea, in this case, of prospecting into 4 chunks. Then I say, okay, within each of those chunks, within each of those sections, what are the key components that need to be discussed or introduced as part of the book? All of my writing, and I attempt to do this, but I never know if it's as effective as I'd like it to be. But somebody just said to me last week, they said, Shawn, you need to create kind of a book study program, which, by the way, I am working on. So keep an eye on my site for that, ShawnCasemore.com. But they said, because your writing is always very, not only practical, but it's always set up in a way that, you can read it and apply it. So I'm not much of a conceptual writer. I'm more of a take this step, do this thing. Obviously, you have to make the adjustments for what you're selling in the market you're in. But that was a compliment they gave, which I appreciated. But it validated for me that, yeah, when it comes to writing a book, I do go through those different parts of the book. And I say, okay, what are the logical steps you'd need to take? One of the changes that happened when I wrote The Unstoppable Sales Prospecting System, sorry, I shouldn't be putting it in sideways, is the idea that when I was thinking about the system, I started out initially talking about the system early on. And I thought, well, hold on, I want to break the system down into chunks. So chunks such as talking about using email, talking about using the phone, talking about using direct mail, talking about running client events. In the book, I cover a variety of ways. I'm going to say about 8 ways, I believe it is, because there's 2 parts, each with 4 chunks, that talk about, different strategies to use to prospect. But the reality is you're likely not going to use all 8. Now, this is something I've been using in my training for several years. I've got a diagram, a model, if you will, that says here's the 8 core ways to prospect. And I always say to sales professionals, you need to choose 3. So I thought, I'm going to write the book in the same manner rather than say you should always email, because no, you shouldn't. Depending on what you sell, the market you're in, who you're selling to, sometimes email doesn't make any sense. I'm going to break it down into saying, here's the different tools, here's the different approaches and methods to prospect. You decide which makes most sense for you. But my rule of thumb is always, you need to pick 3 and be active on them weekly, daily. So the book changed a bit because I initially started with the system, and then I decided, no, I'm going to break these down, let the reader choose which ones apply, and then I'm going to give them the system, and they just inject which of those 3 processes or more that they're using to prospect. So that's how the book was. I guess if I back up a bit, that's how the idea came about. That's how I broke the book down into chunks, and then from those chunks, which are, I shouldn't call them chunks, parts of the book, sections of the book. For each of those, identify 4 different areas, sometimes 5, that need to be addressed. One of the changes that happened while writing this book is I went from putting the process first to putting it last, because I wanted to give the readers a chance to really decide what makes the most sense for them. And I guess the last thing I'll mention is a bit of a surprise for me when it comes to writing the book, because if you go back to what I mentioned earlier, so I tend to have the training process already in play, right? And then the book comes next. A lot of people write the book and then create the process. I've got the process and then I write the book, because that process that I've come up and used, again, in sales kickoff meetings, when I deliver keynotes, in sales training that I do, or even something I discuss in coaching, it's been field tested. So I'm not writing a book conceptually hoping this thing will work. I know it works because we've been applying it with teams around the world in all sorts of different sectors. So with that in mind, one of the surprises I had in the book is the interest in it, because again, it's much more tactical. It's very specific to an area of sales that many people struggle with, and the interest has been phenomenal. So if you have bought the book, I appreciate you for doing that. If you haven't got a copy, it's available in all great places books are sold. The last thing I guess I'll add, for those of you who have read or are considering reading, I've built several resources that accompany the book. So every book I write, there's always diagrams and checklists, and then I put those into resources. And if you buy the book, you'll see within the book how to get access to those. There's no charge to doing so. It's simply a page you go to. You can download those assets. I decided in this situation to take all the resources from my previous books and combine them. So actually, when you get the book and you see where to go to get access to the resources, you'll get resources from the Unstoppable Sales Machine. If you're a leader, you'll get resources from the Unstoppable Sales Team. So always trying to, I guess, add more value, essentially, which is something I promote in my training and speaking, but always trying to add more value to the reader. So this is a bit of a different live stream. I realize many of you are not book writers, nor do you ever plan to be, but I just thought I'd explain how the process came about, some things I learned along the way, some surprises and some changes that happened with this book. As I mentioned, a couple more on the go at this point. We'll see where that goes. So hope you've enjoyed this. Another one of my weekly live streams, this time, again, talking about the writing process of my book, The Unstoppable Sales Prospecting System. I look forward to seeing you again next week. And until then, let's get out there and go sell something. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.